Welcome in. This is a segment from the Slumpbuster Fantasy Football Podcast with Aris Blakeney. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy.
So let's go on to receivers. This is typically your first or second draft pick, depending on where you're slotted in the draft. You might take a receiver first at the end of the first round. So let's get into these guys as well. Top 5, we have Davante Adams, kills it in Green Bay every year. DeAndre Hopkins, who didn't drop a pass last year. Michael Thomas, who just got paid. Julio, who's, he's a PPR monster. And then OBJ, who finally has a quarterback. What do you think of this?
You have Davante Adams listed as your number one wide receiver here. If Aaron Rodgers had it his way, he would throw to him 20 times a game. So it makes sense why you have him there. But I like Hopkins just a little bit more. And why I like Hopkins is with the improvements on the weapons around him and Will Fuller, I see him being able to potentially not only replicate his production he already has, but exponentially improve it. I think that when it comes to DeAndre, he's one of the hardest workers in the league. He, like you said, he has potentially the greatest hands in the league. And he's just developed such a rapport working with Watson that I could see him taking that next leap and just establishing himself overall as the number one fantasy wide receiver. I would feel comfortable drafting DeAndre Hopkins all the way at 5 or 6.
Yeah, not far off from his current draft position, which is about 7. So, not much of a quote-unquote reach, as we would say. But, yeah, Hopkins, his only down year was when he had Brock Osweiler. So, he's going to kill it regardless of who he has throwing him the ball. But it does help that he has one of the best quarterbacks in the league in Watson. But I like Mike Thomas as well. He's Drew Brees' favorite target out there. Drew Brees is, throws for 5,000 yards more than any other quarterback in the league. And that has to go somewhere.
You are right. When the general starting unit is on the field, he is the number one wide receiver. That could also work to his detriment as he's going to be more keyed on. However, when it comes to Drew Brees, it's tough to really key on anyone. He does such a great job of spreading the ball around. The reason I like Mike Thomas as well, though, is just his week-to-week consistency is always there. Although his blow-up weeks aren't nearly as high as other receivers, he does just find a way to consistently give you that 15 to 20 points that helps you win a week. That's also why I actually love Davante Adams as well. Adams had a streak where he either caught a touchdown or gave you a 100-yard game week to week throughout the season. So you'll take that. You'll take those guys with those high floors that even outweigh a lot of people's ceilings.
Yeah, so that's where I like Odell Beckham here as well. He finally has a quarterback who can push the ball downfield, whereas Eli Manning had 2 passes last year of 50 yards or plus. Baker Mayfield is going to ball out. Freddie Kitchens lets Baker throw the ball deep. And you can't really key on OBJ as much because you have Jarvis Landry on the other side. That's going to benefit him where he didn't really have a running mate in New York. So OBJ, I like it at the 5th wide receiver slot. So,
well, true, but I did feel like Baker was at his best when he was spreading the ball around. It's going to be interesting because OBJ's production has been largely based on being the sole target out there in New York. So he is going to have a little bit of a reducement in his importance to the team in that role. One of the big things when we talk about how exciting this Browns team is going to be is because it's not just Jarvis Landry. Let's face it. You have Chubb out of the backfield. Eventually you're going to add Kareem Hunt to that combination as well. And then you have David Njoku, who also is going to challenge for targets. I think if you're talking about any potential bust pick, I'm actually going to throw it out there. I think OBJ is. He's missed a ton of games in the last few years, so you can't rely on him even being in the field, and you're going to have to spend a second-round pick at minimum to draft him.
Yeah, I can see all those concerns, especially in Njoku. He's going to be a big target in the red zone. If they get down there, they're going to be looking for their tight end and not Odell Beckham. But I still like him there. But, yeah, there are some injury concerns with the ankle that he sustained and, suspension. Where his first year, he had the hamstring injury. So he is injury-prone as well. Let's go on to the next section. We have your namesake, Juju Smith-Schuster, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Adam Thielen, and our everybody's favorite, Antonio Brown. I love him just because he's so entertaining this offseason. He's giving us a lot of content. But who's your favorite guy out of this next 5?
I will say I'll probably be your favorite Juju in fantasy this coming year. Just throwing it out there. Now, out of this group, probably my favorite is going to be Tyreek Hill. I'm just intrigued to see how this offense evolves more with him. I mentioned it last week when we were talking about the AFC and NFC West. I think that we haven't even seen the best of Patrick Mahomes quite yet. And I think that also involves Tyreek Hill taking the next step. He's come a long way from just being a standard gadget-type receiver that he was just a couple years back. Now he's legitimately vying for that number one slot. The ceiling isn't even established yet.
Yeah, his weekly ceiling seems to be going up every year. But my favorite guy on this next set is Mike Evans, who finally gets an offensive guru at coach in Bruce Arians, who's worked with some of the best quarterbacks in the league, elevating their games, worked with Peyton Manning, worked with Andrew Luck, worked with Carson Palmer down in Arizona. He's going to, open up opportunities for Evans to get the ball a lot. And I can see a big year for him. I really like him in this, second tier. You might get him in the second round, maybe even into the third round. You're drafting Evans, and that's a really good wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1. You might even sneak him in as your wide receiver 3, depending on how people view the Bucs.
I would say probably my concern when it comes to Evans, and to his credit, he's always managed to remain amongst the top tier, is just going to be, we don't really know what we have in Jameis right now. Jameis could potentially get benched for all we know, and if he gets benched, want to know who their backup is? Blaine Gabbert. And that's not good for anyone's fantasy production. And I don't necessarily think that he could get benched because he's not putting up gaudy numbers, because Jameis Winston has been known for that. He could be benched just because he's immature. And that's going to take a huge hit on Evans' value. And even when Winston is on the field, Evans was at his best last year when Ryan Fitzpatrick was throwing him the ball, not Winston. Winston has a tendency to want to focus more on the middle of the field, involve tight ends, which if you're talking about O.J. Howard, that's going to be fantastic for him. But it's ultimately going to hurt Evans. I just, I'm less enthusiastic about his value. Also, hey, shifting over to AB, if I'm getting AB at right now you have him ranked number 10. If I'm getting AB as the 10th receiver off the board, I'm going to be very happy. Traditionally, at least in the last few years, you've had to draft AB with at minimum the 4th or 5th pick in the draft in the first round. Now that he's sliding down just because of his off-the-field shenanigans, I could see this being one of the biggest steals you get in the second round. He's not going to put the same value that he had out there in Pittsburgh, but he's still going to be amongst that top tier. He's still going to get his catches. And if he's not getting his catches, well, you can see that turn into a fun argument between him and Derek Carr, but I think that Gruden and company will be happy to rectify that.
Yeah, Carr can air the ball out, so I can see him putting up big numbers, sliding it into that top 5 receiver slot as well, like he did last year. He led the league in touchdowns last year. Hopefully he could do that again for you at the 10th receiver position. Right now he's going at 23rd pick. That's a steal, really, for a top 5 receiver talent. Sometimes, weekly he's the best receiver in the league. So if you're getting him at 23, that's a heck of a deal. Let's move on to the next guys. You have my darling child, Keenan Allen. I love this guy. T.Y. Hilton, Robert Woods, Stephon Diggs, and then Julian Edelman. What's your favorite guy out of this group?
Well, I love the Juju, so I have to love the Edelman as well. No, I'm kidding. So I did mention T.Y. I'm less enthusiastic about because of what's going on with Andrew Luck. He's probably my biggest bust pick out of this group of guys. And in Allen, he has such an established floor. I know one of the big things that always comes up with Keenan Allen was injury concerns early on in his career. But he just had a lot of bad luck injuries, whether it be the lacerated kidney or the ACL injury. Those are just stuff that you can't help. Now, I think Mike Williams is going to have a bigger role in this offense this coming year, but it's not going to hurt Keenan Allen. He has established, 8 to 10 catches a game. At one point, he was putting up 10 to 15 catches, which if that's your floor in a PPR league, you're going to be unstoppable. Not counting his touchdowns, not counting his yards. 15 points alone is pretty much what you would love to have from your number 1 wide receiver. So if you're getting him at a wide receiver 2 value, good for you. Woods, I think he's probably the best wide receiver out of the Ram system, but between Cooks and Kupp, going to be interesting to see who really comes out of that grouping. I think it's possible, too, in a legitimate draft strategy to draft all three of them and just hope for week-to-week production from the Rams.
Yeah, I actually like Cooper Kupp more than these other two, because if you saw last year when Cooper Kupp went down, the offense didn't really have the same juice. Robert Woods is kind of more of that intermediate receiver. Cooks really just goes, deep over the top. Kupp is kind of just throw him out there, get a mismatch on like a slot corner or even a linebacker sometimes, and he just kills it out of that slot position. But yeah, Keenan Allen, he is Philip Rivers' number one target. He went 3 weeks last year where he had 10 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. Never been done before in the NFL, and he did it. So his floor, barring any freak injuries again, is pretty high. His ceiling also is kind of capped just because down in the red zone, you're going to go to the bigger body receiver in Mike Williams, and they're also getting Hunter Henry back, who's going to be a huge red zone target. So touchdowns from 25 yards out, really going to be his bread and butter. I don't see very many touchdowns getting closer to the red zone, even closer to the touchdown area. So his ceiling is capped, but he has, a really high floor, especially in PPR leagues where he's going to get, 8 to 10 catches a week. All righty, on to the next guys. We have Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, who we just mentioned, Mike Williams, who we just mentioned, Jarvis Landry, and Tyler Boyd, who's going to be an interesting one in the early weeks due to the injury with A.J. Green. Who do you like out of this group?
Well, out of this group, I think who has the most potential is going to be Mike Williams. I like what the Chargers were doing with him at the end of last year, featuring him more in the red zone. So even though touchdowns are a little harder to predict, I think that he could potentially take that next leap. It's going to be his third year. You can argue second year because his rookie year was a bit of a wash. But I think that this guy has the biggest breakout potential of the year, which is basically what you want when you start getting deeper into the wide receiver position. When Landry, he's going to be a safe pick. And Boyd, like you mentioned, he has potential to be good for you in the early runnings. But for the most part, I'm not too enthused by this group.
Yeah, Tyler Boyd killed it last year once A.J. Green went down. He established himself as the number one receiver in Cincy. But yeah, like you were saying, Landry's going to be a safe pick. Cooks is going to be a safe pick because they're going to want to open up the field in L.A. And then Mike Williams had 10 touchdowns last year in his, people would argue his rookie campaign. So I can see him, matching that and even getting a little bit more, especially without having Melvin Gordon in the field. Melvin Gordon got a lot of screen passes. He got a lot of looks in the red zone. And he also ran the ball in. So now you're looking at Justin Jackson, who's going to be taking over that lead role. Not as big as Melvin Gordon, so you might be looking at more red zone targets for Mike Williams and for Hunter Henry. All righty, on to the last five. We have Corey Davis, DJ Moore, Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard, and Alshon Jeffrey. Pretty weird because they're all the number one receivers on their respective teams, but they're in that weird flex range for a number one receiver where you're not too sure what you're going to get out of them week to week. What do you think?
Again, I'm not terribly excited about these guys, specifically at where I have to draft them. But if you told me I had to pick one of these guys, it's going to be Kenny Golladay. And that's just a matter of what I believe could happen with the Lions offense. Matthew Stafford loves to have a number one wide receiver. Now he lost Golden Tate, so those targets he gave to Tate last year out of the slot, those are gone. And someone needs to catch the ball around here. It's not going to be entirely Kerryon Johnson out of the backfield. So I think that Golladay, and plus, this guy's a monster. He's huge. He could be pivotal in the red zone, really shift your week-to-week production just based off catching 2 touchdowns for you. Being the number one target in an offense is something to be cherished. However, not all offenses are built the same, of course. Obviously, you mentioned Corey Davis, DJ Moore. These are run-first teams, so those are going to limit those guys' ceilings just by nature of that. And then when it comes to Sterling Shepard, he has a depleting Eli Manning. He's never really been the number one guy. And even when it comes down to it, he is not going to be the number one guy in 4 weeks when Golden Tate returns from his suspension. He's going to take a huge step back when Tate comes to this offense, and Eli Manning is not going to be targeting him downfield.
Yeah, and to touch on Alshon Jeffrey, it was weird last year seeing the difference between who Carson Wentz favors in Zach Ertz and who Foles was favoring in Alshon Jeffrey. When Wentz is on the field, Ertz is the go-to guy. And when Foles was on the field, it was Alshon Jeffrey, and Ertz was kind of an afterthought. So again, with Foles being back, or Wentz being back on the field, he's going to go, back away from the receivers and go back to his guy that he trusts in Zach Ertz. But yeah, Sterling Shepard, even though he is the quote-unquote number one, he is week 5 getting back to the PPR monster known as Golden Tate, who's going to catch, roughly catches about 100 balls a year. That's a really good year for a PPR person.